Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my Wordsworth Classics collection. So this is one in a series that I have not updated in a very, very long time that I intended to kind of do last year, which was essentially to slowly take you through my bookshelves, to give a bookshelf tour that was just very sporadic. I actually don't like filming a traditional bookshelf tour because it's very, very exhausting and it's actually just not feasible with the majority of my shelves. So in the interest of getting organized, which I am trying to do right now, I thought I would take you through another classics collection. I already have up my Penguin Classics and my Oxford World's Classics collections, though technically probably at this point that ought to be updated. But my Wordsworth Classics, I know this is a very controversial line of classics. I completely understand it, and I actually completely understand why it is a line that some people really hate. But I personally like them. So Wordsworth are very affordable classics. And the reason that they get a bad rap, I think anyway, is that the majority of the images that they choose to put on their covers, for their newer editions anyway, are typically quite ugly. A lot of people now, when they are looking to buy classics or collect classics, they're really looking for a truly beautiful edition. And I don't think Wordsworth is that, and I think that's probably why people tend to not really like them, but they are incredibly affordable, and that makes them worth quite a bit to me. But also what makes them worth quite a bit to me is just the format and how the book is laid out. I think these are actually the most readable editions of classics out there. Now, there are a lot of things that do work against them. As I said, they're not really pretty. The images on the cover are not beautiful, but the spines are really, really nice. And the spines look incredible when they are on your shelf together. But something that does kind of also stack against them and is something to keep in mind when you are looking for an edition of classics to try out or to collect more of, I don't really think their notes are all that substantial. So this is kind of a line of classics where I get classics that I don't feel like I'm going to need many notes for. They do have introductions in these editions. Again, they're not really extensive. They're not what you're going to get from Oxford or Penguin. And something also to keep in mind with these is when you are getting a translated classic, you are going to be getting an older translation of it. For example, the majority of the translated classics I have are Russian. I think all of them are the Constance Garnett translations, and that doesn't really bother me. The older translations don't bother me at all, but because these are billed as being a really affordable classic line, they go for those translations that are in the public domain. But let's start going through them. This is not my largest classic collection, but I think it probably is the classic collection that I have that is growing the most rapidly, and it's just because I really think these are very readable books, and I'll show you why as we get into that. But first I want to go through the older Wordsworth classics, which are my favorites, and I wish they still made them like this. And I don't think you'll have much to complain about with the covers here. These are very standard oil painting on the cover of a classic, which is basically what they all are now anyway. The first of these that I have is The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens, and I just think the pastel is so pretty. I really love these editions, and this is really one that I think exemplifies what I'm talking about when I say these are very readable. They just stay open, and they're very, very floppy. The text is so easy to read. I don't really have much to complain about with these editions, though. I do think the shorter ones, the shorter editions, are a little bit more tightly glued and they aren't floppy enough for me. But this is The Old Curiosity Shop, which is high at the top of my list for Dickens. I'm kind of torn between what I want to do with Dickens. I'm just normally pulled to certain titles of his, and I'm certainly pulled to rereading him quite a bit. And I've yet to finish him, so I constantly wonder whether or not I should give in and reread the ones that I want to reread, or if I really should kind of go back and start trying to go chronologically. Now, I have tried to go chronologically before, and we'll get to why I stopped that actually in this bookshelf tour. I then have 4 of Anthony Trollope's Barchester series. So I have Barchester Towers, which is in a smaller edition than the rest of these. I'm not really sure why that is. I picked up all of these used, of course, because they don't print these anymore, but I think this is a really lovely cover. The smaller edition I don't like as good. As you can see, it wants to fight me a little bit, but the coloring is just so pretty to me. I love the images on the cover. I wish they still made these. I just adore them, and I love the colors. I love the paintings that they choose. And Anthony Trollope is an author I definitely need to read more of. I have the sense I would like him, but I also have the sense that he might be somebody who's just not for me, who's a little bit too slice of life for me. And so I'm interested to see if I really feel that way as I continue with him. I also have Dr. Thorne. I have Framley Parsonage. And then I have The Small House at Allington, which is my favorite cover of these. Also a Charles Dickens is a new addition to my library, and that is Martin Chuzzlewit. I should have had these together. Now, I have a bad feeling about Martin Chuzzlewit, but I essentially picked it up because it was in this edition. But I think it could go one of two ways. I think this will either be maybe my least favorite Dickens, or it might wind up being a sleeper hit for me. So I know people feel very torn on this one, and I'm interested to see what my opinion on it will wind up being. On to the more iconic black-spined Wordsworth Classics editions. These are the ones that have the ugly covers, and these are the ones that I think people really critique. And once again, on an objective level, I can see why people don't like these, but these are probably $3 or $4 compared to the $10 to $15 that you would pay on a new Penguin Classic. And actually, a lot of Penguin Classics are more expensive than that. Wordsworth is not as inclusive in its title range. It doesn't have as many titles, which is an unfortunate thing, but is also really understandable. And I think one thing I would also say in terms of critiquing Wordsworth, they do have a couple of poetry entries. I wouldn't pick those up. I really would not. I think you're going to want more notes for epic poetry. I'm thinking specifically that they have the Iliad and the Odyssey. If it's your first time reading those, I really think you're going to want some notes, and you're going to want a better edition than this. But otherwise, I really like these specifically for Victorian classics. Actually, the majority of what I have is Dostoevsky because I, for some odd reason, decided to collect him in this edition. But let's get started here. First up, we have Thomas Hardy, Desperate Remedies. I DNF'd this. I really did not like it. I really did not like it. And I am somebody who loves a sensation novel. And this was Thomas Hardy's attempt at a sensation novel. This was just a very, very poor man's Wilkie Collins. He is not meant for the sensation novel style, and in some ways, I've wondered after putting this down, I've wondered whether Thomas Hardy is really a favorite author for me. I've always thought that he was, but I've had as many misses for him as I've had hits. So he is one that apparently I feel very torn on, but I do own Desperate Remedies in this edition. This is one that I don't like because you can see it just is very tightly glued, and it means that you can't really read the text right where it goes into the center of the spine, which is a big pet peeve of mine. But this kind of goes away the bigger the book is. So that's what I tend to do, is I tend to get tomes in this edition because I love how floppy they are. I also have The Well-Beloved by Thomas Hardy, which I've not read, and I intended to read it immediately after finishing Desperate Remedies. When I DNF'd Desperate Remedies, I put this one on the back burner, wondering just how I would feel about it and wondering if really I was in a Thomas Hardy mood, or if I even liked Thomas Hardy, which was a weird space to be in. But like I said, I think I'm about half and half with him. I think I've had 3 big hits, and then I've had 3 that were just okay to real misses, to books that I just genuinely didn't like. And so I think this one will probably wind up being one that I just don't like. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will once again be a sleeper hit for him with me. I also have a copy of Jane Eyre. This is one of the ugliest covers, in my opinion. When we talk about ugly covers, I just think this one is ugly. And I don't know that it conveys very well what Jane Eyre is about, though it does convey a very famous scene in Jane Eyre. But this one is not very floppy. I thought it was going to be. very disappointing. But I have a collectible edition of Jane Eyre, and I really wanted one that I could just mark up and annotate whenever I wanted to reread it. And so that's why I got this one. And I like it fine. Once again, if Jane Eyre is your favorite book, you're going to get a different version of this. But for me, I like a version that I'm not scared to mark up or annotate. And that's also what works really well for me about the Wordsworth Classics. Another Charlotte Bronte is Shirley, which I really enjoyed and I didn't expect to. This is another of a really ugly cover in my opinion. And once again, I don't think it truly conveys what the book is about. I think that's the thing about a lot of these modern ones, the modern Wordsworth Classics. Their covers are not only very garish in my opinion, they also don't really seem to signal to you what the book is really about, which is very, very strange. But all this to say, I love Shirley, and this is possibly one of my favorite Bronte novels. I loved this a whole lot more than I did Villette. I actually DNF'd Villette, but I really, really loved Shirley. Next up is one of my favorites of all time, which is Moby Dick. I love Moby Dick, and I really liked having it in this edition. Again, it was a book that I knew I was going to want to mark up and tab, which I did, and so I was really freed up to do that by using this edition. One thing I will say, though, they do wear quite easily. As you might can see, the color just wears off the spine. As I got this new, I didn't get this one used actually. So that's something else to keep in mind if you're interested in this edition. But I really love Moby Dick, and Moby Dick is now one of my favorite books of all time. I think it's so dreamy. So this is one that is one of my most treasured. It's perhaps my favorite of my Wordsworth classics. Next we have Oliver Twist. I have also DNF'd Oliver Twist. Apparently, in the Wordsworth, I have DNF'd more than I did in either my Oxfords or my Penguins. So I've DNF'd quite a few of these. Oliver Twist is an unfortunate thing. I started reading it because I wanted to read Charles Dickens, kind of in chronological order. And this is actually his second published book, so that's how far I got. But I was really unenthused with Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist apparently started life as kind of a nonfiction diatribe on children working in warehouses and stuff like that. And I think you can still see that. I think you can see that this book is about the ideas, it's about the concepts, it's about Charles Dickens critiquing society. It's not really about Oliver or about the other characters. And I didn't get really far into this. I think I got about 100 pages in. It's also just a very, very heavy read, which I think you expect when you know what Oliver Twist is about. But Oliver Twist, the book, is very different from any of the iterations of it or adaptations that I have seen. So this is one that I will definitely return to. But I know a lot of hardcore Dickens fans place this at the bottom. And I think that's probably where I'm going to wind up. I also have the Pickwick Papers in this edition, which is like one of my most treasured Wordsworth classics as well. And this is another example of just a perfect book. I mean, look at this. Oh my gosh, it just wants to fall right open. Again, the text is very, very easy to read, but the Pickwick Papers is Charles Dickens' first published novel, and it was written serialized, as most of his novels were. This, to me, is the most obvious of his books that I have read so far that was serialized. But that's kind of the nature of the game with the Pickwick Papers. I really am quite fond of this, and I know this is another one that a lot of hardcore Dickens fans feel is one of his weaker books, but for me, it's one of my sentimental favorites of his. We are officially into my Dostoevsky section, and we can call it my Russian section because I do have one other book that is a Russian classic that is not by Dostoevsky in this stack, but the most of these are Dostoevsky because I read my first Dostoevsky in this edition and I just love it. So I got the Brothers Karamazov. All of the Dostoevskys have these really creepy images of like faceless people on the cover, and there's something about it that actually does really feel Dostoevsky in tone. So these really don't bother me the way that some of the other covers do. But this is one that I have told myself I am going to save for last. It's going to be my last Dostoevsky. I've said that. I've said it, but I don't know that it's true. I think that one of the next Dostoevskys I pick up will likely be the Brothers Karamazov. I don't know. I'm pulled towards a lot with him, but I think the Brothers Karamazov is going to be the trump card for me. So I'm interested to go on and read it, but at the same time, that makes me want to save it until last. Next, we have Devils by Dostoevsky, and this is one that I am very, very excited about. And this is definitely going to be one of my next Dostoevskys. I know I'm going to love this. I've heard it's very dense and it's very political, but I think that means that I'm probably really going to like it. I think what I've liked with Dostoevsky in the past is just how he has conversations about concepts and ideas, and really, the characters are great most of the time, but I think I'm really interested in the conversations that he is having by having the characters interact with each other. And so this is one that I think is going to work for me, but I've heard for a lot of people, this is one that they love or hate. So I'll be interested to see. Maybe I'll wind up being somebody that really hates it. I hope not, and I just don't think so. I really think I'm gonna like this one. Then we have Crime and Punishment, which was my second Dostoevsky, and I really liked Crime and Punishment, but I don't think it hit me as hard as it did other people. I know for a lot of people, this is their first with Dostoevsky, and it is a banger for them. It's just an absolute lightning and strike moment. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't that. It still was a very good book, but I think were this the first book of his I read, I don't know that I would say I was obsessed with him, that I really loved his writing, that I was looking forward to automatically diving into more. I don't know that I would say that. This one was good, but it wasn't great in my opinion. Though I do definitely see why this is the work of his that people talk about the most. So it's a hard place to be. I think if I was going to recommend a Dostoevsky book, this is the one that I would recommend. But at the same time, for me personally, it's not the incendiary book of his. Next, I have Notes from Underground and Other Stories, which I have dipped in and out of, and I just genuinely love his short fiction. I have not yet read Notes from Underground. I've heard that's super intense, and so that's one that I'm saving off on, but I have read several of the stories in here, and I just love them. Dostoevsky has kind of become a favorite author for me. I really love him. He's very, very dark, and there is a level of whimsy in some of these stories that I just really appreciate. I think there's something Dickensian about his short stories, and I think there is also something that is just kind of stereotypically Russian folktale about his stories, which is something that really appeals to me. So I've been thoroughly enjoying this as I have dipped in and out of it over the past couple of months. Then we have my first Dostoevsky, and I think the Dostoevsky that will remain for me a top favorite, and that's The Idiot. I adore this book. I truly, truly just adore this book. And I see why this is one that doesn't work for some people. I see why a lot of people struggle with this one because there are some weird things that happen, particularly at the end. And I think for a lot of people, the ending will ruin this book for you. But if you're reading for the characters and you're reading for the writing and the concepts and the conversation that is happening throughout the book, I really think that you're going to feel rewarded by the ending. And I think that the book as a whole will feel rewarding to you. This is just not only my favorite Dostoevsky, but it's my favorite Russian classic. And it might just in general be one of my favorite classics. Last of the Dostoevskys, I have The House of the Dead and The Gambler. So this is a bind-up of two of his novellas, and both of them are apparently pretty dark. Similar to the Brothers Karamazov, I debate where to put his novellas in my reading of him. I sometimes wonder if I should just knock them out of the way because they're shorter, but I also want to keep them around so that I have something shorter to read between some of his big behemoths. So these are two that I haven't yet read, but I am looking forward to them. I think The House of the Dead is going to be a really hard read. I've heard from other readers that it is. And The Gambler, I've heard some interesting things about, which makes me think that The Gambler is really going to work well for me. Last but not least is another Russian classic, but it is actually not a Dostoevsky, so you can be proud of me. That's Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. And a lot of people have recommended this to me over the years, but a lot of people have also told me that I'm not going to enjoy this at all. And so I'm interested. I'm really interested to see how I'll feel. And I do think this will be love it or hate it for me. I truly do. I'm really looking forward to this. This is one that I want to pick up very, very soon. So I don't know. I will let y'all know how it goes when I do pick this one up. So those are all of my Wordsworth Classics editions. Like I said, this is probably my smallest classics collection, but I think it is also possibly my most growing classics collection right now. Other than my Oxfords, I am way more interested in the Oxfords and in the Wordsworths than I am in Penguins right now. And that's a very interesting thing to say. It's not something I ever thought I would say when I first got into classics collecting and reading. I really thought I was a Penguin girl all the way, but I think I'm more of an Oxford girl, and I think I just, in terms of readability, really prefer the Wordsworths over some of the more expensive versions. Again, there are drawbacks to these. They don't have the widest selection, and they also aren't the prettiest. But again, the covers might be ugly, but you don't really see them when they're sitting on your shelf. You see the spines, and I actually think the spines look really, really nice all together on the shelf. But I would love to know your opinion on Wordsworth down below. Do you read them? Do you collect them at all? But that's going to be all from me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.